What if the most credible UFO evidence doesn't come from conspiracy theorists or amateur skywatchers, but from the Central Intelligence Agency itself? Tonight, we're diving deep into declassified CIA documents that reveal encounters so well documented, so thoroughly corroborated by multiple military and civilian witnesses that they've left even the most skeptical intelligence analysts without answers. These aren't stories about blurry photographs or questionable testimonies. These are cases where radar tracked unknown objects, where military pilots pursued craft that defied the laws of physics, where doctors treated injuries from unexplained aerial phenomena, and where the most advanced surveillance systems of the Cold War era recorded things that shouldn't exist according to our understanding of technology. By the end of this investigation, you'll understand why the CIA preserved these cases in their archives for decades, not because they believed in extraterrestrials, but because the evidence was too compelling to dismiss and too problematic to explain. Let's begin with the summer night in 1952, when something appeared over the most restricted airspace in America, forcing a response that would reach all the way to the White House. The night of July 19, 1952 began like any other summer evening in Washington, D.C. Inside the radar room at Washington National Airport, the air felt heavy and quiet, broken only by the slow rotation of the antenna and the soft hum of equipment. Just past 11 in the evening, radar operator Edward Nugent leaned toward his scope as an unfamiliar return appeared near Andrews Air Force Base. It was sharp, bright, and solitary, sitting in an area where nothing was scheduled to fly. The return drifted slightly, then steadied, and Nugent watched as a second target appeared nearby. Within minutes, there were 7. What makes this case so remarkable isn't just that unidentified objects appeared over the nation's capital. It's the overwhelming convergence of evidence from multiple independent sources that makes dismissal nearly impossible. Nugent called his supervisor, Harry Barnes, who examined the targets himself. The movements were inconsistent with commercial traffic, and the shapes did not resemble the smeared, unstable marks caused by weather. Some of the objects hovered almost perfectly still. Others slid from one position to another with abrupt shifts, as though they were stepping across the air rather than flying through it. Barnes immediately contacted Andrews Air Force Base with a brief message asking if they showed anything. The reply arrived quickly, confirming they had the same returns. 2 independent radar stations, one civilian and one military, were watching identical targets appear over the nation's capital. This simultaneous confirmation eliminated the possibility of equipment malfunction or isolated technical error. Around the same time, the control tower at Andrews reported visual contact. An airman standing outside the tower saw a series of bright orange lights moving slowly above the airfield. Another observer described them as like falling stars going upward, flickering and then stabilizing in place. Their movements matched the radar traces almost perfectly. While the tower watched the lights hovering near the base, Washington National reported that one of the radar targets had suddenly accelerated across the screen at a calculated speed of roughly 7,000 miles per hour. In 1952, this was 20 times faster than the speed of most military aircraft and far beyond anything in experimental development. Through the night, the sightings continued. One commercial pilot reported a cluster of bright white lights pacing his aircraft at a distance. Another saw a bluish object moving faster than any jet he had ever flown alongside. From radar rooms to airport towers to cockpits high above Maryland, the descriptions painted the same picture of silent lights or objects that could hover, accelerate instantly, and reposition themselves with unnatural precision. By dawn, the story had already reached military intelligence channels, but it was what happened exactly 1 week later that turned the incident into a national phenomenon. On the night of July 26th, radar operators at Washington National again noticed unusual returns appearing across their scope. The distribution was similar to the previous weekend, with objects hovering, drifting, and then accelerating. Andrews Air Force Base reported identical returns, and this time the activity pushed deeper into restricted airspace, including areas near the White House and Capitol building. Commercial aircraft flying nearby also reported visual contact. A Capital Airlines flight on approach to Washington described 4 bright lights maneuvering in a loose formation. The pilot, Captain Pierman, maintained visual contact with the objects for nearly 14 minutes. He watched them hover, shift positions, and make sudden movements contrary to any known aircraft behavior. His co-pilot saw the same thing. Radar operators confirmed that objects matching Pierman's description were present on their scopes throughout the encounter. This triple confirmation of radar, pilot, and co-pilot observation creates an evidential foundation that's extraordinarily difficult to challenge. The situation now demanded a military response. Air Defense Command scrambled F-94 Starfire interceptor jets from Newcastle Air Force Base in Delaware. Yet each time the jets entered the area, the unknown targets vanished from radar. When the jets left to refuel, the objects returned. This cycle repeated through the night. The unknowns remained one step ahead, not outrunning the jets in open air, but simply disappearing each time an intercept became possible. This behavior pattern suggests something far more significant than atmospheric anomalies or equipment malfunction. It implies awareness and response to the military presence. By morning, the press was already aware that something remarkable had happened above Washington. Newspapers across the country ran front-page headlines describing mysterious lights, radar confirmations, and military jet scrambles. For the public, the sightings raised obvious questions about what the objects were, why they were over the Capitol, and why they could not be intercepted. But inside government offices, the concern was focused on something far more complicated than extraterrestrials. The Central Intelligence Agency was monitoring the situation closely. Although the CIA was not established to study UFOs specifically, government agencies routinely passed intelligence to the CIA when reports carried potential national security implications. The issue in July 1952 was not the objects themselves, but the reaction they triggered. At the height of the Cold War, senior analysts feared that widespread UFO reports could overwhelm communication channels or be manipulated by adversaries to create confusion or panic. An internal CIA memo from the period, later declassified through the Freedom of Information Act, acknowledged that the rising wave of UFO sightings required immediate attention to evaluate their effect on national readiness. 2 weeks after the Washington sightings, the White House demanded a full briefing from the Air Force. General John Samford, the Director of Air Force Intelligence, held the largest press conference in the history of the Air Force up to that point. In measured terms, he stated that while most sightings could be explained, a small percentage remained truly unexplained. When pressed about the Washington events, Samford pointed to temperature inversions as a potential explanation for unusual radar returns, but he offered no resolution for the visual sightings or the rapid accelerations recorded on radar. Behind the scenes, the CIA recommended a more systematic response. In January 1953, it convened the Robertson Panel, a group of prominent scientists led by physicist Dr. Howard Robertson of Caltech. The panel examined radar data, pilot testimony, official reports, and visual accounts from the Washington sightings. Their discussions covered everything from atmospheric effects to optical illusions to classified aircraft. Although temperature inversion was raised as a potential cause, the panel had access to data showing that the radar returns were sharp and consistent across multiple stations. Temperature inversion can create false echoes, but it does not produce identical returns on separate radar systems situated miles apart. Nor does it account for the lights seen by pilots or the sudden accelerations recorded independently. Despite these unresolved aspects, the panel concluded that the real issue was not the phenomena themselves, but the public interest surrounding them. Their final report recommended a campaign to reduce public fascination with UFOs through education and subtle debunking. The aim was not to solve the unknowns, but to lessen their impact on national stability. In effect, the CIA shifted the conversation from "what are these objects?" to "how do we manage public reaction?" The Washington sightings were never officially explained beyond the general suggestion of atmospheric conditions, yet the urgency behind addressing them faded once the mechanism for shaping public perception was in place. Looking back, the evidence from July 1952 remains unusually consistent for a UFO case. 2 radar stations tracked the objects. Air traffic controllers and tower personnel witnessed lights that matched the radar positions. Commercial pilots provided extended visual descriptions from the sky. The object's movements included hovering, instantaneous acceleration, and rapid directional changes, none of which correspond to temperature inversion effects. Interceptor jets dispatched to investigate repeatedly found nothing upon arrival, only for the objects to reappear once the jets left the area. This behavior implies an intelligent response, but no such claim was made in official documentation. The Air Force's temperature inversion explanation never fully addressed the totality of the events. Inversions can cause radar anomalies, but they do not cause pilots and controllers to see coordinated lights, nor do they cause synchronized returns across different radar frequencies. Most importantly, inversions do not cause objects to disappear when jets approach and then reappear afterward. Yet the CIA's focus remained firmly on information control rather than scientific investigation. The agency viewed the sightings through the lens of Cold War psychology and national security. If a foreign nation exploited mass UFO reporting to clog communication systems, the U.S. response capability could be delayed. The Washington events, especially the second weekend, demonstrated how suddenly public attention could spike. The CIA's solution was to reduce the seriousness with which the public regarded UFO reports, not to determine the nature of the objects. In the quiet language of intelligence documents, the Washington sightings gradually faded from classified discussions. No definitive resolution was ever reached. The objects recorded on radar and witnessed in the sky remain unexplained. They were tracked, described, recorded, and investigated, but ultimately set aside in favor of strategies that addressed public reaction instead of the phenomenon itself. What many Americans didn't know during the 1950s and 60s was that their government was inadvertently creating UFO sightings on a massive scale. High above the scattered cloud layers of the American West, where the sky deepens from pale blue to a dark, silent indigo, the world becomes something unfamiliar. At 70,000 feet, daylight behaves differently, stretching across a curved horizon, thinning into space. The air is too thin for sound, too thin even for ordinary flight. It was here in the upper atmosphere during the 1950s and early 1960s that a remarkable chapter of UFO history quietly began, one that the public saw only from the ground and one the CIA understood from an entirely different perspective. The U-2 reconnaissance aircraft was built for a simple purpose: to reach altitudes no other plane could reach and to stay there long enough to collect intelligence during the height of the Cold War. When test flights began in the mid-1950s, no commercial aircraft flew higher than about 20,000 feet. Even military jets struggled to exceed 30 or 35,000 feet. The U-2, by comparison, climbed routinely above 60,000 and later neared 70,000 feet, operating in a part of the atmosphere that pilots of the era considered almost mythical. The aircraft was also highly reflective. Its long wings, pale metal skin, and slow gliding patterns made it visible at dusk and dawn from far below, even when observers had no reason to expect an aircraft at such heights. As the U-2 program expanded, the volume of UFO reports expanded with it. Airline pilots, farmers, police officers, and air traffic controllers described shiny, fast-moving objects glowing in the upper sky, appearing where no plane should exist. At sunset, the U-2 could catch sunlight long after the ground had faded into darkness, creating an orange or silver glow that seemed detached from any known aircraft signature. For civilians, it appeared as a bright object traveling silently at extreme altitude. For commercial pilots, it seemed like a high, fast disk that stayed in sunlight even as their own aircraft moved into darkness. For the small number of military pilots who noticed the strange reflective flashes, it looked like something moving above the operational ceiling of any known aircraft. The CIA, watching these reports accumulate, understood the cause long before the public did. The agency took careful note of how many UFO sightings emerged along U-2 flight paths. In internal documents declassified in 2013, the CIA acknowledged that more than half of the unexplained UFO reports during the late 1950s were directly tied to U-2 flights. These reports caused complications because every public sighting risked revealing the existence of a classified aircraft that could fly higher than anything built by the Soviet Union or the United States at the time. For intelligence officers, the concern was not aliens, but the possibility that an adversary might deduce American reconnaissance capability based solely on civilian UFO descriptions. What made the situation more complicated was that the Air Force did not know the details of every classified CIA flight. In some cases, when civilians reported fast-moving lights at high altitude, the Air Force launched UFO investigations that never matched up with their own aircraft logs. As a result, the Air Force often categorized these sightings as unexplained, even though the CIA could have explained them easily if the information had not been compartmented. The public saw only the final Air Force summaries. The CIA saw the cause, but could not share it. This disconnect grew larger with the development of an even more advanced aircraft, the A-12 Oxcart. Before the world knew the SR-71 Blackbird, there was the A-12 built under the CIA's Oxcart program. It flew far higher and faster than the U-2, with speeds exceeding Mach 3 and altitudes above 80,000 feet. During testing at Groom Lake in Nevada, the A-12 generated its own wave of UFO reports. Civilians saw streaking silver shapes at twilight and sudden flashes across the sky. Some observers described objects darting or jumping between positions. Others reported long, glowing forms that moved faster than any jet they had ever witnessed. The A-12 produced a faint glow at high speed as the aircraft's surface heated due to friction with thin upper atmospheric air, creating a shimmering metallic appearance. Combined with its altitude, it seemed more like a luminous arrow cutting across the sky rather than a conventional plane. Unlike the U-2, the A-12 did not glide. It moved with a sharp, persistent velocity that was easy to notice from the ground, particularly under certain lighting conditions. CIA documents later revealed that Oxcart flights were responsible for another significant cluster of UFO reports, especially those filed in the Southwest and near commercial air corridors. In several archived memos, analysts noted that many UFO observations labeled unexplained by the Air Force correlated with A-12 testing windows. Some observers described objects traveling at extraordinary speeds, performing abrupt maneuvers, or leaving behind short, glowing streaks of heat. The public had no way to reconcile these sightings with anything familiar, which meant they naturally labeled them unknowns. The Air Force's Project Blue Book, responsible for UFO investigations from 1952 to 1969, found itself in the middle of this situation. Blue Book investigators often lacked the classification level required to access U-2 and A-12 flight schedules. When a pilot described a reflective object outside his cockpit window at 40,000 feet, Blue Book checked with Air Defense Command and commercial traffic logs but found nothing. When a police officer reported a bright, slow-moving object overhead, Blue Book examined meteor records, satellite positions, and astronomical explanations, but again found nothing. The reports remained unresolved, even though they were simply observations of aircraft that Blue Book was never allowed to learn existed. The CIA used this confusion to its advantage. According to declassified files, the agency intentionally allowed some UFO reports to remain unexplained in official Air Force publications, because doing so helped protect the secrecy of reconnaissance missions. The public speculated about extraterrestrial craft, lights, disks, and strange aerial objects, while the CIA continued to fly classified aircraft with minimal risk of exposing their capabilities. Some documents even describe how the CIA encouraged Air Force personnel to offer natural explanations for sightings, like weather, balloons, reflections, or stars, regardless of whether these explanations aligned with eyewitness descriptions. The goal was preserving operational secrecy. One revealing section of the 2013 declassification describes how U-2 flights dramatically altered the number of UFO reports on certain days. During evening test flights, especially near sunset, UFO sightings increased sharply because the U-2 remained illuminated while the ground and lower atmosphere fell into darkness. These sightings would often appear along the aircraft's flight path in a predictable pattern. The CIA monitored this correlation carefully, noting which regions produced more observations and how quickly these reports reached newspapers or the Air Force. In April 1960, the relationship between UFO sightings and intelligence operations became even more significant when a U-2 flown by Francis Gary Powers was shot down over the Soviet Union. This single event revealed the existence of the U-2 to the world and forced the CIA to reassess how it handled high-altitude aircraft secrecy. Before the incident, the agency could rely on public confusion to explain away many sightings. Afterward, the program required more cautious practices because the U-2 and other reconnaissance aircraft were now widely discussed. By the time the SR-71 program replaced Oxcart and the Air Force assumed control of high-speed reconnaissance, the pattern was clear. The highest proportion of UFO reports between the mid-1950s and late 1960s correlated directly with CIA flight schedules. The CIA's own declassified document summarized it plainly. Many unexplained UFO sightings were the result of U-2 and A-12 flights at altitudes beyond the capability of aircraft of the time. The public could not identify these aircraft because their existence was classified, and the Air Force, lacking access to CIA operations, often labeled the sightings unidentified. What emerged from this era was not a single spectacular UFO event, but a long, quiet overlap between classified aviation and public perception. The aircraft that were designed to remain invisible generated lights, reflections, and movements so unusual that they appeared to many observers as extraterrestrial craft. The CIA never set out to create UFO sightings, but the agency quickly learned that the phenomenon served its secrecy well. The confusion surrounding the objects helped conceal the most advanced reconnaissance technology of the Cold War. Today, looking back through the lens of declassified records, the pattern becomes clear. The public filed thousands of UFO reports. The Air Force attempted to explain what it could. The CIA understood the truth but remained silent. What remains from this time is a record of how secrecy, technology, and public perception intersected in the sky. A reminder that sometimes the unknown is simply something unexpected flying far above the limits of what the world believes is possible. The first sign that something unusual was unfolding off the coast of Cuba in 1967 did not come from radar or from a pilot's report or from a flashing light in the sky. It began instead with the quiet flow of intercepted radio traffic moving across a U.S. intelligence listening post. These signals were part of the daily soundscape of the Cold War, routine military communications transmitted between Cuban air defense controllers and their pilots. Most days, the recordings that reached American analysts were predictable, structured, and uneventful. But on one particular afternoon, a series of transmissions broke the familiar rhythm with urgency and confusion, carrying a tone that suggested something far from ordinary was taking place. It started with an alert from a Cuban radar site reporting an unidentified object approaching their airspace. The radar operators described a bright return moving at an altitude and speed that did not match any known aircraft in the region. The initial assumption was that it might be an American spy plane or reconnaissance vehicle, but its behavior did not align with that either. The track climbed steadily, then slowed, then climbed again in a vertical pattern that drew immediate attention. Within minutes, Cuban controllers dispatched a MiG-21 to intercept the intruder. The voice of the pilot, young and calm at first, entered the intercepted stream. He acknowledged the vector heading given by ground control and reported that he was climbing to meet the target. The MiG-21, one of the Soviet Union's most advanced fighters at the time, was capable of supersonic speed and rapid ascent. It was designed to intercept American bombers and reconnaissance aircraft, and the Cuban Air Force trained regularly to respond to unidentified objects near their airspace. But as the pilot continued to speak, analysts noted something unusual. His tone shifted from procedural to tense as he reported visual contact with a bright object far above him, shining in the afternoon sky. According to the CIA summary of the intercept, later declassified, the pilot described the object as luminous and moving in a manner he struggled to follow. He attempted to match its altitude as it continued to climb. The MiG-21 ascended at maximum performance, straining its engines as it pushed toward the limits of its operational ceiling. Cuban ground control instructed the pilot to close the distance and attempt to identify the object. The pilot continued to report that the object was bright and climbing, the descriptions growing shorter as the pursuit intensified. Then another voice entered the transmission. A second MiG pilot launched to assist in the intercept. He too attempted to climb toward the object, but the first MiG remained closer. The CIA summary noted that the object continued to climb at a rate that surprised even the trained analysts who reviewed the transcript.
The pilot, breathing heavily in the thin air at high altitude, reported that the object suddenly increased brightness. He described it as a sudden flash, an intensification that filled his cockpit canopy. What happened next was recorded in the intercepted communications with chilling clarity. As the first pilot acknowledged the brightening light, his transmission cut off abruptly. At that same moment, the second MiG pilot, several miles away, shouted that the first aircraft had exploded in mid-air. Fragmentation appeared on Cuban radar. Ground controllers attempted to call the pilot repeatedly, but there was no reply. The CIA summary stated that the aircraft disintegrated and that no missile launch or hostile action was detected. U.S. analysts listening to the events in real time immediately began reconstructing the sequence. There had been no report of missile fire from the ground, no radar signature of a projectile, and no evidence of an air-to-air engagement between Cuban aircraft. The MiG simply appeared to break apart while pursuing the luminous unknown. The second pilot, shaken, reported that the object continued to climb rapidly after the explosion, moving upward in a manner inconsistent with any aircraft he had ever seen. He remained on station temporarily before being ordered back to base. His final transmission regarding the object was brief: "It is going up." The object eventually left Cuban radar coverage. In the days that followed, Cuban authorities attempted to determine the cause of the MiG's destruction. Official explanations suggested an aircraft malfunction, structural failure, or engine explosion at high altitude. The MiG-21 was known to be reliable, but any aircraft pushed to its limit could experience stress. Yet key details raised questions that no internal investigation could resolve. The timing of the explosion coincided exactly with the pilot's description of the object brightening intensely. The second MiG pilot saw no sign of mechanical failure or fire before the disintegration, and U.S. intelligence analysts found no evidence of missile activity, electronic interference, or hostile engagement.
Inside the CIA, analysts treated the incident with unusual seriousness. The summaries circulated through intelligence channels, marked by cautious, matter-of-fact language, but unmistakably describing an event without precedent. The document noted the pilot's transmissions, the radar confirmations, the sudden explosion, and the lack of any conventional explanation. It made no claim about the nature of the object and offered no speculation. Instead, it simply preserved the sequence exactly as heard. This caution reflected the broader context of the Cold War. Any unidentified aerial event near Cuba carried enormous implications for U.S. national security. The memory of the Cuban Missile Crisis was still fresh, and surveillance of Cuban military communications remained a high priority. Unexplained aerial encounters could not be dismissed lightly, especially when they ended in the destruction of a fighter aircraft. Some American analysts considered the possibility of equipment malfunction or pilot error, but these hypotheses conflicted with the available evidence. Others examined whether the object might have been an American reconnaissance asset, but no known U.S. aircraft operated at such altitudes with the maneuvering characteristics described in the Intercept. The CIA records contain no suggestion that the U.S. was involved in the encounter, and no flight paths matched the event. What made the incident unique and deeply troubling for intelligence officials was the combination of simultaneous radar tracking, real-time voice communication, and the catastrophic loss of an interceptor in direct pursuit of the object. Many Cold War UFO reports were visual sightings or brief radar anomalies. This case included both, along with an aircraft destruction event witnessed by another pilot and confirmed by radar. To this day, no definitive explanation has been established. Mechanical failure remains a possibility, but analysts have never connected such a failure to the exact moment of the pilot's final transmission or to the sudden brightening he described. Electronic interference has been suggested, though no evidence of such interference appeared in the recordings. Atmospheric phenomena have been considered, but none match an object climbing continuously, emitting bright light, and appearing on radar simultaneously. The significance of the 1967 Cuban MiG incident rests not in its mystery alone, but in the clarity of its documentation. It is one of the few UFO encounters directly captured in real time through military communications, corroborated by radar operators, pilots, and intelligence analysts simultaneously. The event did not depend on memory, interpretation, or later reconstruction. It unfolded minute by minute, with every step preserved in intercepted transmissions. The unknown object behaved with capabilities that no aircraft of the era possessed, and its final interaction with the pursuing MiG remains unexplained. The CIA summary, calm and factual, closes the event without conclusion. It does not name the object, it does not suggest a cause for the explosion, it simply records what was heard, what was tracked, and what was lost. In that silence, the incident remains one of the Cold War's most enduring UFO mysteries, an encounter witnessed by professionals, documented by intelligence, and never fully explained. As we continue examining these declassified CIA cases, a pattern begins to emerge that's impossible to dismiss through conventional explanations. These aren't isolated incidents occurring in remote locations with questionable witnesses. These are events that happened in strategic locations, observed by trained military personnel, tracked by multiple radar systems, and documented in official intelligence channels. The cases share common characteristics that challenge our understanding of aviation technology, even by today's standards. Consider the factory disc encounter in East Germany during 1953. Morning across Soviet-controlled East Germany was often subdued, the sky dimmed by factory smoke and cold air drifting down from the mountains. It was early summer when a group of German mechanics began their shift at a state-operated industrial yard near the small town of Erfurt. This factory, like many in the region, worked under the supervision of Soviet military authorities, handling steel fabrication, heavy equipment assembly, and vehicle repair. The encounter began with a sudden startled shout from a mechanic on the eastern side of the yard. His cry echoed between the metal structures, cutting through the background noise of hammers and machinery. Several workers turned toward him, expecting an accident or a dropped tool. Instead, they followed his gaze upward. Hovering just above the line of trees outside the yard was a large circular object. The men who later described it to Soviet officials agreed on its size and shape. It was broad, metallic, and round, disc-shaped, roughly 15 meters in diameter, perhaps more. The object did not wobble or tilt. It held itself perfectly level, suspended in silence with a steadiness that none of the mechanics could reconcile with their understanding of aircraft. East Germany, in 1953, was familiar with Soviet transports, fighters, and helicopters, But the craft above them did not resemble any of these. It had no rotor downwash, no jet exhaust, no wings, and no visible means of lift. At first, the men simply stared. There was no movement from the Soviet guards. Even they seemed frozen by the sight. The CIA memo notes that approximately 14 laborers and 2 uniformed guards were among the witnesses. It was a rare moment in which rank and nationality dissolved under shared astonishment. A few of the workers later said they wondered if the Soviets were testing a new type of aircraft, but the behavior of the guards, who appeared as stunned as the civilians, suggested otherwise.
The object drifted slightly, then stopped again. As it hovered, the men noticed waves of heat coming from the underside. One described it as the shimmering of air above a hot road on a summer day. Another said the heat radiated outward but produced no flames, sparks, or audible noise. The ground beneath the object did not scorch or burn, though the workers nearest the boundary fence felt a sudden warmth, like stepping into a pocket of hot air. According to the CIA memo, the object remained in view for roughly 1 to 2 minutes. The witnesses later described the same sequence independently. After hovering, the disk began to emit a low, pulsing glow around its perimeter. The light did not flicker like a flame or flash like an aircraft beacon. It pulsed gently, brightening and dimming in a rhythmic pattern. The workers watched, their tools hanging uselessly at their sides. Then, without warning, the object rose vertically. There was no tilt, no banking, no acceleration curve. It simply lifted straight upward with a rapidity that astonished the viewers. The CIA memo states that the object ascended with great speed, disappearing into the clouds in a matter of seconds. The men stood still long after it vanished, unsure what they had just witnessed. In Soviet-controlled territory, reporting such an event was not optional. The guards immediately escorted the workers to an administrative office where Soviet personnel conducted brief, urgent interviews. The laborers were questioned separately, yet their descriptions matched closely. They consistently described a large hovering disk emitting heat and then ascending vertically. None of the workers attempted to embellish their stories, and none offered speculation. They simply repeated what they had seen. The CIA memo that eventually captured this testimony arrived through the usual channels of the early Cold War intelligence network. The United States was collecting vast amounts of information on Soviet technological development, not only through espionage, but also through defectors, travelers, and intercepted reports. This document, though brief, was considered significant enough to preserve. It described an event that had no easy explanation and occurred in a region where Soviet experimental aircraft were closely monitored by Western intelligence.
If the Soviet Union were secretly developing an advanced vertical lift craft, an event like this would have generated extensive interest. Yet there were no other reports suggesting a Soviet prototype of this nature. In 1953, Soviet aviation was focused primarily on conventional jet fighters, strategic bombers, and early helicopter models. No aircraft in their inventory, nor in the inventory of any nation, could hover silently, emit heat without propulsion exhaust, and then climb vertically at extreme speed. What makes this case particularly compelling is the heat effect observed beneath the craft. Heat distortion without visible exhaust is uncommon in conventional aircraft. Jet engines create distortion but with sound, pressure, and flames. Helicopters create downward air turbulence. Balloons and gliders produce no heat at all. The phenomenon described by the workers, silent radiant heat from a hovering object, did not match any known technology of the period. Another detail that stands out is the disk's instantaneous vertical ascent. Even modern vertical lift aircraft, tilt rotors, experimental jets, or helicopters require transitional movement, mechanical noise, and significant power output. A silent rise into the sky, executed cleanly and rapidly, remains beyond current engineering capability in the manner described. The encounter remains one of the more intriguing European sightings in the early Cold War period, not because of spectacle or drama, but because of its simplicity. A group of workers saw a disk. The disk hovered silently. It emitted heat. It pulsed with light. It rose vertically at extraordinary speed. And that was all. The CIA memo closed the case without comment. There was no follow-up investigation recorded in Western archives, no additional sightings linked to the event, and no attempt by analysts to suggest explanations. The pattern of well-documented encounters extends beyond American and Soviet experiences. In 1966, an event unfolded over East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, that would capture the attention of CIA analysts precisely because of its multiple independent witnesses and the clarity of their observations. Dawn in East Pakistan often arrived softly, with warm air drifting over the rice paddies and the slow hum of river life beginning its day. On one such morning, the calm routine of a police outpost near the town of Khulna was interrupted by an event that would later reach the desks of CIA analysts thousands of miles away in Washington. According to the Declassified Directorate of Intelligence summary, the incident began shortly after sunrise when a patrol officer stationed along a village road noticed an unusual light in the sky. It appeared at first as a bright spot, sharper than a star, too bright to be a reflection and too stationary to be an aircraft. The officer watched it quietly, unsure whether it was significant enough to report. But as the minutes passed, the object grew clearer. It revealed a distinct circular outline, glowing with a steady pale luminosity that did not flicker like a star or shift like sunlight reflecting off a plane. The officer called another policeman to observe. Within a short span of time, additional officers, villagers, and nearby field workers gathered, all pointing to the same bright disk positioned against the morning sky. Its altitude was difficult to judge exactly, but the CIA summary estimated it at 15 to 20,000 feet, well above the operating height of local civilian aircraft, yet far below the orbital path of satellites. It hovered motionlessly, maintaining the same position relative to the horizon despite shifting winds at lower altitudes. At the same moment, a domestic flight traveling from Chittagong to Dhaka, a standard route operated by the East Pakistan Air Transport Board, reported seeing a similar object. The pilots noticed it first as a luminous shape far above them. Initially, they believed it might be the reflection of sunlight off another aircraft, but its steady glow and unusual stationary position made that unlikely. The captain altered his course slightly to maintain visual contact. According to the intelligence summary, both the captain and co-pilot described the object as circular, bright, and sharply defined. Its glow remained constant even as the aircraft moved through layered cloud formations. The flight crew contacted air traffic control, but no aircraft were listed on the register at that location or altitude. The skies over East Pakistan were quiet that morning. Pakistan International Airlines' scheduled flights were all accounted for. Indian military aircraft did not enter the region, and no American or Soviet reconnaissance vehicles were reported in the area at that time. Back on the ground, the object began to shift. Witnesses described a slow lateral movement, almost a slide across the sky, as if the disk were drifting deliberately rather than pushed by wind. It then stabilized again, remaining fixed for several more minutes. Some villagers thought the object might be a weather balloon, but the brightness and sharp definition of its edges contradicted the smooth opacity characteristic of high-altitude balloons. Moreover, weather balloons rarely remain completely motionless and do not emit their own light. The police officers observing the object grew increasingly concerned, unsure whether they were witnessing an astronomical event, a foreign aircraft, or something entirely unknown. One officer attempted to photograph the object using a basic field camera, but the result captured only a faint point of light against an overexposed sky, insufficient detail for identification. Still, the officers filed their report later that same day, documenting the time, appearance, and movement of the disk as precisely as they could. The CIA received the report through an intelligence liaison channel that monitored foreign aviation anomalies and regional security developments. The Directorate of Intelligence maintained an interest in sightings that might indicate clandestine aircraft, missile tests, or foreign reconnaissance platforms. Any aerial object that appeared in disputed or geopolitical hot zones, and East Pakistan in the mid-1960s certainly qualified, was subject to analysis. When the report reached CIA analysts, it was handled with the same careful tone used for all ambiguous sightings. The analysts examined possible explanations. Astronomical reflections were unlikely given the sustained hover and lateral movement. Known Pakistani aircraft did not match the description or altitude. Indian flights were ruled out because radar logs showed no activity along the border corridor at that time. American intelligence aircraft such as U-2s or RB-57s could perform at high altitude, but they did not hover or move slowly, nor did they emit consistent luminosity. The object's brightness was another puzzle. Atmospheric conditions could amplify reflected light, but such reflections typically fluctuate. Witnesses reported no such flickering. The glow appeared intrinsic, stable across its entire visible surface. None of the observers mentioned noise, exhaust, or the contrails typically associated with jet aircraft. The pilots described the object as silent and without propulsion trails. The ground witnesses noted the same. The CIA report also highlighted the consistency between the aircrew and the police accounts. These two groups, separated by distance and unaware of each other's observations, independently described a circular, luminous object at comparable altitude and position. This independent corroboration strengthened the case, removing the possibility of misinterpretation caused by local atmospheric conditions or optical illusions experienced from a single viewpoint. In internal communications, analysts refrained from proposing any firm explanation. The final notation in the declassified document stated simply that the object remains unidentified and that no known aircraft or natural phenomenon matched the descriptions provided by witnesses. The tone was calm and clinical, but the fact that the report was preserved indicated that the agency considered it noteworthy. The calm tone of the CIA summary preserved the encounter in its simplest form, a luminous, circular object observed from multiple perspectives at an altitude that did not match conventional aircraft behavior. The analysts concluded nothing, dismissed nothing, and speculated nothing. They recorded the facts, compared them against known aviation patterns, and left the case unresolved. As humanity reached into space during the 1960s, the pattern of unexplained encounters extended beyond Earth's atmosphere. The 1960s were a decade defined by competition in space, and every launch, every test flight, and every deep space transmission carried strategic weight. In that environment, the United States monitored the Soviet space program with extraordinary focus. Stations stretching from Alaska to the Indian Ocean tracked Soviet rockets, satellites, and unmanned probes with the same intensity that radar crews once reserved for bombers. By the time the Soviet Union began flying its Zond spacecraft, uncrewed circumlunar test vehicles designed to pave the way for a possible human mission, American intelligence followed every trajectory, every course correction, and every fragment of telemetry that slipped across the atmosphere. It was during this period that a series of unusual tracking anomalies appeared, anomalies the CIA quietly preserved in internal space analysis summaries. The Zond missions were part of the Soviet Union's L-1 program, intended to send cosmonauts around the moon and return them safely to Earth. Although the program never achieved a crewed flight, multiple unmanned missions tested re-entry procedures, guidance systems, and long-distance telemetry. To American intelligence, each launch was a window into Soviet capability. Tracking stations watched them from the moment their boosters ignited. Normally, the telemetry signatures and radar echoes from these missions behaved predictably. But on several occasions, analysts observed something else. Returns and signatures that did not match the Zond spacecraft, did not correlate with known space debris, and did not appear in Soviet launch records. One such anomaly occurred during a Zond flight in the late 1960s when U.S. tracking stations noticed a faint secondary target moving along a near-parallel course with the main spacecraft. At first, analysts assumed it was a detached booster segment or a fragment from the launch vehicle. Debris from Soviet launches often entered unusual orbits, and fragments occasionally followed similar paths for short periods. But as analysts examined the tracking data, the object's behavior differed from typical debris. The fragment, if it was a fragment, maintained an unusually stable position relative to the main Zond vehicle. Instead of drifting away or altering its orbital characteristics over time, the secondary return remained within a consistent range, almost as if it were following the Zond intentionally. The CIA's internal documentation, created by the Office of Scientific Intelligence, did not speculate on the nature of the object. The tracking station logs were included without commentary, preserving the radar-derived coordinates as they appeared. At least one analyst annotated the data with a brief note stating, "The secondary object does not correlate with expected debris signatures." There was no mention of propulsion, no reference to maneuvering, and no attempt to label the object. Yet the persistence of the return raised quiet concern. If the Soviet Union had developed a small co-orbiting platform capable of shadowing a primary spacecraft, it would represent a technological capability that deserved scrutiny. The Zond missions continued, and so did the anomalies. On another flight, U.S. tracking stations again reported a faint radar target that appeared intermittently along the spacecraft's path. The return was weak but repeated enough times that it was not dismissed as noise. Analysts compared the data against known upper stage components from the Proton launch vehicle, but no match was found. The Soviet Union had not launched any satellites or probes at the time that could account for the trajectory. There was no record of a co-launched payload. Yet there the object was, persistently appearing, then fading, then appearing again, like a small shadow following the larger craft. The geopolitical context of these anomalies is important. During the 1960s, both the United States and the Soviet Union worried about potential military applications of space technology. Co-orbiting platforms could theoretically be used to inspect or disable enemy spacecraft. They could test new guidance methods or sensor packages. Thus, the potential significance of a mysterious object shadowing a Zond craft was not lost on intelligence officials. Yet the available data never reached the threshold required to declare the anomalies technology-driven. There was too little telemetry, too few radar returns, and no repeated pattern across missions. In one internal CIA communication, an analyst noted that the object tracked alongside one of the Zond missions exhibited no apparent acceleration or deceleration. This detail mattered. Debris often changes position relative to a spacecraft due to slight differences in velocity or atmospheric drag, especially during the early stages of orbit. A stable positional relationship suggested either active station keeping or an unusual coincidence. The analyst offered no conclusion. The data was simply logged and passed along. Decades later, when portions of the space surveillance records were reviewed by historians, the Zond anomalies were mentioned only briefly in academic literature. They never became widely known events, in part because they lacked narrative drama. No pilots, no eyewitnesses, no dramatic maneuvers. They were lines of numbers and tracking logs, interpreted cautiously by analysts who understood both the limitations and the importance of space monitoring. In the calm language of intelligence documentation, the Zond anomalies remain unexplained. The radar traces show faint echoes. The signal intercept reveals fleeting transmissions. The analysts' notations conclude with quiet uncertainty. Nothing in the archived summaries resolves the objects into known Soviet hardware, and nothing attributes them to natural celestial sources. They remain, decades later, quiet shadows along the path of Soviet deep spacecraft, objects that appeared briefly in the early space age and then slipped into the historical record without ever being fully understood. Perhaps the most disturbing and well-documented case in the CIA's files involves not just visual sightings or radar confirmations, but actual physical injuries to multiple witnesses. In 1977, the small fishing villages near the island of Colares in northern Brazil lived by the rhythm of the tides and the glow of kerosene lamps. Electricity was rare. Radar stations were far away. Life moved quietly across the dark water. But during a stretch of months beginning in August of that year, the calm was interrupted by a series of aerial events that would become some of the most thoroughly documented in South American history. The first reports came just after nightfall, when fishermen returning from the open water noticed shafts of light descending from the sky. At first, the lights seemed distant, like stars dancing above the waves. But as the fishermen continued to watch, the beams moved closer, bright, narrow, and unnervingly precise. The men described them as concentrated streams of light, more like surgical instruments than lantern beams. When the lights touched the surface of the river, the water glowed faintly, but without the splashing or noise one might expect from a descending aircraft. The beams remained motionless for several seconds before rising straight upward and disappearing into the sky. Word spread quickly across Colares. People in houses near the shore began watching the night sky in apprehension. Some described small luminous objects moving in slow arcs above the treetops. Others reported cylindrical or spherical craft hovering silently before emitting the same narrow beams of light. The villagers gave the phenomenon a name, chupa chupa, roughly translated as the sucker sucker, referring to a belief that the lights caused weakness and drained energy from those they touched. The first medical case arrived one humid evening when two fishermen came to the local clinic complaining of severe headaches, dizziness, and weakness. They told the attending physician, Dr. Weleda de Carvalho, that a bright beam of light had struck them while they were rowing toward shore. Carvalho initially suspected dehydration or a common tropical infection, but when she examined the men more closely, she noticed burns on their necks and torsos, small round marks surrounded by reddish irritation, unlike sunburn or contact burns.
Blood tests revealed unusual reductions in hemoglobin levels, suggesting mild radiation-like effects. When the fisherman described the beam of light as hard, hot, and concentrated, she took careful notes and reported the injuries to municipal authorities. Within days, more cases appeared. A woman in her 40s reported being struck by a beam that pierced the roof of her hut, leaving her temporarily paralyzed. Another villager described a glowing object with two bright eyes hovering outside his window before emitting a beam that caused intense chest tightness. The pattern in injuries was consistent: small puncture-like burns, localized numbness, and drops in red blood cell counts. Some victims reported a sensation of being pulled or compressed by the light. Dr. Carvalho documented each case carefully, noting the distinct injury characteristics and the psychological coherence of her patients. None appeared hysterical. All gave calm, consistent descriptions of what they had seen. By September, the fear in Colares had reached such intensity that villagers began stringing palm leaves across their rooftops, believing the leaves would repel the lights. Others constructed large fires at night, hoping smoke would obscure them. Some families slept in groups, believing safety lay in numbers. A few fled to Belém, the nearest major city. The situation eventually drew the attention of the Brazilian Air Force, which dispatched investigators from the 1st Air Region Command to Colares in late 1977. The mission was known internally as Operation Prato, Operation Saucer. Under the command of Captain Holanda, the team arrived with cameras, binoculars, notebooks, and a directive to document any aerial phenomena. Over the next 3 months, they conducted night patrols along the river, interviewed villagers, took measurements at alleged landing sites, and photographed strange lights moving across the sky. Dozens of photographs emerged from these patrols, many taken with long exposure. Some showed pairs of luminous objects hovering above the tree line. Others captured rapid streaks of light that Hollande later described as objects performing silent, controlled maneuvers. Soldiers reported seeing crafts the size of small cars, metallic or glowing, moving slowly and then accelerating suddenly. Several described rectangular objects emitting straight beams toward the ground. At one point, Hollande claimed he had stood less than 200 meters from an object shaped like a flattened sphere, hovering silently before darting away. While the Brazilian Air Force collected its own evidence, Brazilian newspapers began reporting on the Chupa Chupa events, publishing interviews with victims and statements from local officials. These reports were broadcast through radio and television, and because they originated in a region of strategic interest, they were monitored in real time by the CIA's Foreign Broadcast Information Service. FBI's analysts translated Brazilian news segments, summarized witness testimony, and forwarded the material to U.S. intelligence offices. Several of these translated bulletins survive in declassified form, containing references to injuries, burns, radiation symptoms, and government investigation. The CIA did not send personnel to Colares, but its monitoring reveals that the agency took the situation seriously enough to collect and archive the reports. The tone of the FBI's translations was calm and matter-of-fact, reflecting the careful neutrality of U.S. intelligence processing. They noted that dozens of villagers reported the same type of light beams and that medical authorities had documented physical injuries. The Brazilian government, according to the translated segments, stated publicly that it was taking the matter seriously. Operation Saucer remained active until early December 1977. Then, just as quickly as the lights had appeared, the phenomenon diminished. Villagers reported fewer sightings, the beams stopped, and by January 1978, the mission was quietly ended. The official Brazilian report, later partially released, concluded that unidentified aerial objects had indeed been observed, though their origin remained unknown. The documents did not dismiss the villagers' accounts, nor did they deny the injuries. Instead, they recorded the events and allowed the ambiguity to remain. What makes the 1977 Amazon events so significant in intelligence history is the combination of physical injuries, multiple witness sightings, and official documentation from a national government. The CIA's involvement was limited to monitoring publicly available broadcasts, but the inclusion of the case in FBI's logs means it crossed the threshold of international significance. These logs remained in CIA archives not because the agency believed the lights were extraterrestrial, but because the events indicated something unusual occurring in a region with little technological infrastructure, where conventional aircraft activity was rare and easily detectable. As we've examined these declassified cases, a disturbing pattern emerges that transcends any single explanation. We've seen radar confirmations from multiple independent stations tracking objects that perform impossible maneuvers. We've heard intercepted communications of trained military pilots describing encounters that ended in aircraft destruction. We've reviewed medical documentation of physical injuries from unexplained light beams. We've analyzed space surveillance data showing objects shadowing classified missions. We've read testimony from credible witnesses across multiple nations, all describing similar characteristics of unknown craft. What makes these cases so compelling isn't their sensational nature, but their restraint. These are not wild stories told by unreliable witnesses seeking attention. These are calm, professional reports filed by radar operators, military pilots, police officers, doctors, and intelligence analysts who were simply documenting what they observed through their respective professional instruments and expertise. The CIA's approach to these cases reveals something equally significant. The agency rarely speculated about the nature of these objects. Instead, it focused on two primary concerns. First, whether the phenomena represented foreign technological advancement that could threaten national security, and second, whether public reaction to these events could be exploited by adversaries or disrupt military communications and response capabilities. This dual concern explains why the CIA both preserved these cases and simultaneously worked to minimize public attention to them. The Washington flyovers of 1952 demonstrated how quickly UFO reports could overwhelm communication channels and capture national attention. The Robertson panel's recommendation to reduce public fascination with UFOs wasn't about hiding evidence of extraterrestrials. It was about maintaining operational readiness during the Cold War. Yet this strategy created its own problem. By dismissing credible sightings and providing inadequate explanations for well-documented events, the CIA and Air Force undermined their own credibility. When temperature inversion is offered as an explanation for objects that multiple radar stations tracked performing vertical climbs and instantaneous accelerations, when atmospheric conditions are blamed for craft that pilots observed hovering silently before departing at extreme velocity, the explanations become less believable than the phenomena themselves.
The U-2 and A-12 revelations provide important context. They prove that the government was indeed flying craft that appeared impossible to observers, and that the CIA deliberately allowed UFO reports to remain unexplained to protect classified programs. This confirmation validates the suspicions of many who believed the government knew more than it was revealing. However, it also raises a critical question. If some UFO reports were explained by classified aircraft, what explains the cases that occurred in locations and at times when no such aircraft were operating? The Cuban MiG intercept occurred in 1967 over restricted Cuban airspace where no American reconnaissance aircraft had any business flying. The East German factory disc appeared in broad daylight, witnessed by Soviet guards and civilian workers simultaneously, hovering with characteristics that no aircraft of any nation possessed. The East Pakistan encounter involved commercial pilots and ground observers independently describing the same object at the same time. The Colares events included physical injuries documented by medical professionals and investigated by a national air force. These cases resist the comfortable explanation that all UFO reports during the Cold War were either misidentified classified aircraft or atmospheric phenomena. They suggest that something else was occurring, something that neither American nor Soviet intelligence could fully understand or control. The space-based anomalies add another dimension to this mystery. Objects appearing to shadow Soviet deep space missions suggest observation or reconnaissance capability that exceeded known technology of both superpowers. If these were American assets, the CIA would have known and could have explained them internally. If they were Soviet experiments, they represented capabilities far beyond what intelligence assessments suggested the Soviets possessed. The fact that these anomalies remained unexplained in CIA documentation suggests they were genuinely unknown to both sides.
The historical pattern revealed in these declassified CIA cases has profound implications for how we understand contemporary UAP reports. The All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, or AARO, continues to encounter similar phenomena today. Modern cases still involve multiple sensor confirmations, trained military observers, and objects performing maneuvers that exceed known technological capabilities. The Western United States case from 2021 initially appeared to show 5 lights moving in formation across restricted airspace. AARO's analysis ultimately concluded these were distant commercial aircraft that happened to align from the sensor's perspective. This explanation demonstrates how careful analysis with complete data can resolve apparently mysterious cases. However, it also highlights a crucial distinction. AARO could only reach this conclusion because they had access to radar data, flight records, atmospheric conditions, and sensor telemetry. Many historical CIA cases lacked such complete data. The Moroccan radar disc from 1954 involved both visual observation by a French Air Force pilot and radar confirmation, but the object's sudden acceleration and vertical departure were never explained. The Libyan embassy oval from 1975 was observed by credible diplomatic personnel but lacked radar confirmation.
The Papua New Guinea formation from 1959 involved nearly 40 witnesses observing a structured craft with visible figures for extended periods across multiple nights. These cases sit in a different category from the explained Western United States incident. They involved sustained observation under clear conditions with multiple independent witnesses describing specific structural details and behaviors that couldn't be dismissed through atmospheric effects or distant aircraft misidentification. The Rex Heftlin photographs from 1965 present another instructive example. Project Blue Book dismissed them as probable hoaxes, yet independent optical analysis found no evidence of manipulation or support structures. The mysterious collection of the original prints by individuals claiming to be government officials, followed by their unexplained return decades later, adds layers of intrigue that simple hoax explanations don't address. Perhaps most significant is the 1994 Great Lakes penetration. This event involved NORAD coordination between multiple radar sites, civilian witnesses including law enforcement, and documented responses from both U.S. and Canadian air defense systems. The objects were tracked for nearly an hour, performed vertical accelerations impossible for conventional aircraft, and prompted formal air surveillance investigation. The case remained classified for years, and even after declassification carried the designation of unknown source in official NORAD records. What these historical cases demonstrate is that UAP encounters didn't begin with modern sensor systems or recent military acknowledgement. The pattern extends back through decades of documented incidents involving the most sophisticated surveillance and tracking systems available at each period. The consistency across time, geography, and observational methods suggests a phenomenon that persists regardless of technological advancement or geopolitical context. After examining these declassified CIA cases in depth, we can draw several evidence-based conclusions that don't require speculation about extraterrestrial origins or advanced secret technology. First, the phenomenon is real in the sense that credible observers using reliable instruments have repeatedly detected and documented objects exhibiting characteristics that don't match known aircraft or natural phenomena. This doesn't tell us what these objects are, but it confirms they're not simply imagination or misperception. Second, the phenomenon has demonstrated consistent characteristics across decades and locations. Objects have been observed hovering silently, accelerating instantaneously, changing direction without banking, moving between extreme altitudes rapidly, and, in some cases, apparently responding to the presence of intercepting aircraft. These behavioral patterns appear in cases separated by years and thousands of miles, suggesting either a persistent phenomenon or multiple phenomena with similar characteristics. Third, the government response has consistently prioritized information management over scientific investigation. From the Robertson Panel's recommendation to reduce public interest through the Project Blue Book era's inadequate explanations to the modern slow release of information, official approaches have focused on controlling narrative and minimizing disruption rather than understanding the phenomena. This isn't necessarily nefarious. National security concerns, especially during the Cold War, provided legitimate reasons for such approaches. However, this priority has meant that decades of potentially valuable data and witness testimony were either dismissed or inadequately investigated. Fourth, conventional explanations fail to account for the most credible cases. Temperature inversion doesn't cause objects to appear on multiple independent radar systems while pilots simultaneously observe structured craft. Atmospheric phenomena don't cause trained pilots to describe specific details of hovering disks that then depart vertically at extreme speed. Ball lightning doesn't maintain formation over extended periods while pacing commercial aircraft. The explanations offered for many of these cases require more suspension of disbelief than simply acknowledging that something unusual was observed.
Fifth, the phenomenon has demonstrated what appears to be intelligent behavior in some cases. The Washington flyovers showed objects that vanished when interceptors approached and returned when they left.
The Cuban incident involved an object that climbed continuously while a MiG pursued it, maintaining distance until the aircraft's destruction. The Papua New Guinea encounter included apparent acknowledgement of ground observers' gestures. Whether this behavior indicates actual intelligence or simply appears intelligent due to unknown physical properties remains uncertain, but the pattern exists across multiple independent cases. Sixth, physical evidence exists beyond eyewitness testimony. Dr. Carvalho's documentation of burn injuries and blood abnormalities in Colares victims provides medical evidence of physical interaction. The Rex Heftlin photographs, despite decades of analysis, show no definitive signs of hoax. Brazilian Air Force photographs from Operation Saucer document luminous objects that military personnel observed directly. This physical evidence, while not conclusive about the object's nature, demonstrates that something tangible occurred in these cases. Finally, the pattern suggests the phenomenon predates modern aviation and likely continues today. Historical reports from the 19th century describe similar aerial phenomena, though without modern terminology or investigation methods. Contemporary military encounters reported by pilots and confirmed by advanced sensor systems indicate the pattern persists. Whatever these phenomena are, they appear to be ongoing rather than isolated to any particular era. Despite decades of documentation and thousands of reports, fundamental questions remain unanswered. We don't know what these objects are. The evidence doesn't definitively point toward extraterrestrial craft, though it doesn't exclude that possibility either. Secret military projects explain some cases, but clearly not all, especially those occurring over foreign territory or involving interactions with foreign military forces. Natural phenomena might account for some observations, but the pattern of structured craft exhibiting apparently controlled flight defies easy natural explanation. We don't know where these objects come from. If they're physical craft, they must originate somewhere, yet no launch sites, bases, or return destinations have been identified, despite extensive radar coverage and satellite surveillance. If they're not physical in the conventional sense, we lack frameworks for understanding what they might be. We don't know what capabilities these objects possess. The observed performance characteristics suggest propulsion systems and structural materials far beyond current technology, yet we have no physical samples or technical understanding of how such performance might be achieved. The apparent ability to affect electronic systems, produce physical injuries, and interact with conventional aircraft suggest capabilities we can't currently replicate or adequately explain. We don't know what purpose these objects serve. Military reconnaissance would explain some encounters, but not others, particularly those involving sustained observation of remote villages or apparent interest in nuclear facilities and military installations during the Cold War. The pattern doesn't clearly indicate scientific study, territorial survey, or any other comprehensible objective. We don't know why official responses have been so inadequate. Even acknowledging legitimate security concerns and the need for classified operations, the pattern of dismissal, ridicule, and inadequate investigation seems counterproductive. If these phenomena represent foreign technology, insufficient investigation represents a dangerous intelligence failure. If they represent natural phenomena, inadequate scientific study means missing opportunities to understand unusual atmospheric or physical processes. The decades-long pattern of minimal official attention, despite compelling evidence, suggests either genuine confusion about how to address the phenomena or deliberate policy choices we don't fully understand. The declassified CIA cases we've examined tonight represent only a fraction of the documented encounters accumulated over decades. Thousands of reports remain classified or have been destroyed according to retention schedules. Countless encounters were never officially reported or were dismissed without adequate investigation. The full scope of the phenomenon likely exceeds even the impressive documentation we've reviewed.
Recent developments suggest potential changes in how these phenomena are addressed. The establishment of AARO represents the first systematic, funded government office specifically tasked with investigating UAP reports using modern scientific methods. Congressional hearings have brought unprecedented official attention to the topic. Military personnel are increasingly willing to report encounters without fear of career repercussions. These changes, while still developing, mark a departure from the decades-long pattern of dismissal and inadequate investigation. However, significant obstacles remain. Classification systems continue to restrict information flow, often for legitimate security reasons, but sometimes preventing scientific analysis that could advance understanding. Stigma still discourages reporting and serious investigation by mainstream scientists. Funding for systematic study remains limited compared to other research areas. Public discourse often polarizes between uncritical belief and dismissive skepticism, with little space for careful evidence-based analysis. The historical cases we've examined tonight demonstrate that whatever these phenomena are, they've been consistently observed and documented by credible witnesses using reliable instruments for at least 70 years. They've occurred over restricted military airspace, foreign territories, remote villages, and major cities. They've been tracked by radar, filmed by military cameras, investigated by government agencies, and documented in official intelligence reports. These cases don't prove any particular explanation, but they establish that something real and unexplained has been occurring. The phenomenon deserves serious scientific investigation, free from either dismissive skepticism or uncritical acceptance. The witnesses deserve to have their testimonies treated with respect rather than ridicule. The documentation deserves systematic analysis rather than classification and neglect. Tonight, we've journeyed through some of the most compelling UFO cases in CIA history. We've examined the Washington flyovers, where objects appeared over the nation's capital, tracked by multiple radar stations and witnessed by dozens of professional observers. We've learned how classified U-2 and A-12 flights created thousands of UFO reports, proving the government did hide the truth about some sightings, while revealing that other cases remained unexplained even to intelligence agencies. We've heard intercepted communications of a Cuban pilot's final moments as his MiG disintegrated while pursuing an unknown object. We've reviewed medical documentation from Brazil, where doctors treated injuries from unexplained light beams. We've seen factory workers and Soviet guards in East Germany simultaneously witnessing a hovering metallic disc that departed vertically at impossible speed. We've examined space surveillance data showing mysterious objects shadowing Soviet missions. We've analyzed radar and visual confirmations from Morocco, Libya, East Pakistan, and Papua New Guinea. Each case brings its own evidence, its own credible witnesses, its own documentation preserved in CIA archives. The pattern that emerges transcends any simple explanation. These aren't stories of blurry photographs and questionable witnesses. These are professional observations documented in official intelligence channels, preserved not because analysts believed in flying saucers, but because the evidence was too compelling to dismiss and too problematic to explain. The CIA's careful, understated language in these documents reveals as much as the cases themselves. When intelligence analysts encounter phenomena they can't explain, they don't speculate wildly or jump to conclusions. They document carefully, compare against known capabilities, and when nothing matches, they simply note the observations and leave the case unresolved. That measured restraint makes their conclusions more powerful, not less. When the CIA states that objects exhibited controlled flight characteristics beyond known aircraft capabilities, that conservative assessment carries significant weight. What these cases ultimately demonstrate is that the UFO phenomenon isn't merely a cultural curiosity or a subject for tabloid speculation. It's a persistent pattern of well-documented encounters that challenge our understanding of aviation, physics, and what's possible in our skies.
Whether these phenomena represent advanced technology, natural processes we don't understand, or something else entirely, they deserve serious scientific investigation and honest acknowledgement from official sources. The witnesses who reported these encounters, from radar operators and military pilots to doctors and police officers, deserve to have their testimonies treated seriously rather than dismissed or ridiculed. The data accumulated over decades deserves systematic analysis rather than classification and neglect. The questions raised by these cases deserve honest attempts at answers rather than inadequate explanations that strain credibility more than the original observations.
As we conclude this investigation into the CIA's most compelling UFO cases, remember that these aren't the only such cases. They represent a small sample of documented encounters spanning decades. Thousands of reports remain classified. Countless encounters were never officially documented. The full scope of the phenomenon likely exceeds even what we've examined tonight. Whatever explanation ultimately proves correct, whether these objects represent human technology, natural phenomena, or something else entirely, the evidence demands that we take the question seriously. The witnesses were credible, the documentation is real, the pattern is persistent, and the mystery, despite decades of investigation and speculation, remains unresolved. The truth, as the CIA's own declassified documents demonstrate, is that we don't know what these objects are, and that admission, that honest acknowledgement of the limits of our knowledge, may be the most important truth of all. Thank you for joining this investigation into the hidden files of the CIA. Until next time, keep watching the skies and questioning the official narrative.